Here.
Now the volume's up.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe it's there.
But I feel like we should probably switch the camera. Is it on you now? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe, or, there you go, Kristen. Okay, now you're unmuted.
But I wonder if they can hear what we're saying if we're unmuted.
I think
We don't have a thing.
Oh,
We don't have a thing to talk in, so
they can hear. These microphones should be picking up.
Hey, y'all.
there we go.
Yeah.
We can hear now. Can you hear us?
Yes. If you can hear me all right over there?
Rock? Yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
Great. And we're back. Yes, so we'll go over some different research findings, kind of where things are now and some areas to discuss limitations of that research, because there's actually a lot of limitations on that research. Discuss future opportunities, kind of where research should go, based on like what we're finding right now. So I'll give some dietary considerations and concerns for those who are interested in like following intermittent fasting, and we'll kind of get a bigger picture perspective. I'm really tired. It's finals week, so I apologize. Escape me today. Intermittent fasting is what we consider more of a pattern, not so much a diet. So I've enjoyed seeing this in my mind come out of that diet realm into something more appreciable and considerable, so which would be fun. It was popularized by Michael Bursley, who is a journalist and producer over in the UK and works with BBC. Wrote a book called The Fast Diet, and that spun off a couple other books, multiple cookbooks, lots of other stuff, and now it's super popular. Everyone knows about it. So a couple of definitions here that I liked. I like the first one, simple, voluntary abstinence from food and drink, or alternating times of unrestricted energy intake with times of restricted energy intake. Basically just saying there's times when you eat whatever you want, and then there's times when you don't eat, or you eat a lot less. So that's one thing we'll see with intermittent fasting. There's actually a lot of variations to it. As I mentioned, it qualifies as an eating pattern rather than a diet. And it's actually the maintenance of the energy intake. So, we all have calorie needs. Same with intermittent fasting is that you maintain your calorie intake on the days that you're eating, which distinguishes it from like traditional caloric restriction, where you eat like a little less at every meal every single day. So we'll see some differences with the adherence to this, because it's a very different style of eating as opposed to sit down to your meal and you say, I usually eat this much, but instead of eating this much, let's a little less. So you do that every time. You tend to be more hungry, whereas if you're fasting, you're gonna eat whatever you want, and then you have a whole day where you're just like, I'm just not gonna eat. It tends to be easier to follow. So here's a cool table I found that gives a description of all the different types. The one that's been popularized is the popular 5-2 diet, where you have 5 days of just free eating, and then 2 days of restricted eating. You restrict about 25% of your energy needs on the days that you're fasting. So just the word fasting is kind of troublesome sometimes, because fast, I feel like in everyone's mind means you're not eating. But in intermittent fasting, there are some variations where you can a little bit. So the modified one, the 5-2 diet, was a really popular one, popularized by Michael Mosley. We're 5 on, 2 off, essentially. There is also what they call alternate day fasting, which is exactly what it sounds like. Every other day, you don't eat. Time-restricted feeding. This is probably what we're all most familiar with. It's having a set time through the day that you eat and not eating outside of that window. There could be any range of hours. You can do 3 to 4 hours, 7 to 8 hours, 10 to 12 hours. You can set it from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Outside of that window, you don't eat for the rest of the time. And there are, of course, other types of fasting for religious reasons, but those are generally very different. But maybe with the exception of Ramadan. Interesting thing about Ramadan, though, is while it seems that they might follow more of a 10 to 12 hour time-restricted feeding pattern, since it occurs at night, since they fast during the day, they usually eat a big meal in the evening, and then a lot of the time at night, still has to go towards sleeping, so they end up more with a 3 to 4 hour window. So that was the best studies. But most of what I found actually addresses time restriction. So I'll talk a little bit about the mechanism here, because fasting is a thing that's always been around. It's an evolutionary adaptation that all mammals developed to survive times without food. Because we didn't always live in our current food environment where we just always had food all the time freely available in whatever amounts that we want. So we have 2 main metabolic pathways that govern when we're fed and when we're fasted. So when we're eating, we're getting energy from outside of our bodies. That stimulates insulin production, which causes signaling to a lot of different other things that upregulates glucose intake, fat storage, energy utilization. And then on the other side of things, when we don't have food for a significant period of time, glucagon is the opposite hormone to insulin, which puts the body in more of a catabolic state, more of a breakdown state, where we break down stored glycogen, which is how we store glucose and sugar in our bodies. So we break down glycogen to get energy. We end up breaking down fatty acids. So we derive our energy from different areas. They have very distinct metabolic pathways that they follow. I mentioned ketogenesis here, because this is the one that when glucagon is on, that's what we utilize to develop energy. So we break down glycogen, which gives us glucose, because you need to have a steady level of glucose at all times just to survive. But ketogenesis allows us to use stored body fat to produce ketones as an alternate energy source. That way we can still meet our energy needs without needing all of the carbohydrates coming in from the outside. And I'll compare this to keto in just a minute. In gluconeogenesis, once we've used all of our glycogen that we've had stored up, once all of that's gone, then we start using amino acids, certain amino acids, glycerol from our fatty acids, from our triglycerides, and we put those into a process that creates glucose, so we can maintain our glucose levels without having to eat. So we have both of these processes to continue providing energy and function at a high level, even through long durations of not having food. And there's an interesting concept that's gaining some good traction in the research, connecting those 2 different pathways to metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome is a collection of, not diseases per se, but just symptoms like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, insulin resistance, which is a requirement for it, and obesity. They kind of all happen together. The research is looking at how these 2 signaling pathways, because we're always, in our current environment, we're able to be in the fed state pretty much whenever we want. If we want to, we don't ever have to have times where we go for extended periods of time, like 6 hours, 7 hours, unless we're sleeping or we don't eat. And so what ends up happening in the cell is both of these pathways get kind of turned on at the same time. And there's a lot of different molecules that regulate each other between those 2 that end up building up. And so what happens is essentially the mitochondria that produce all the energy and break down all this stuff kind of just get confused and they just stop because they essentially get muted. They're like, you're telling me to do this and you're telling me to do this. I can't do both. So I'm not going to do anything. And they're finding that that's kind of connecting towards dysregulation, like in the cells, and causing weird fat storages and organs that shouldn't have fat stored in them, and all sorts of other interesting things. I apologize, I feel like I rambled a little bit on that. Do you have any questions that I can like maybe repeat or clarify something on this front?
Doing great.
So there's a difference in keto. A keto diet maintains ketosis, which is the production of ketones when there are no carbohydrates coming in. It maintains ketosis by eliminating carbohydrates without restricting energy intake. The difference between intermittent fasting is that it maintains ketosis by eliminating energy intake, not restricting foods. Not restricting foods and not restricting nutrients. And that chronic process of having energy coming in versus having no energy creates a different metabolic response in the body. So these are distinctly different dietary patterns. As I was mentioning, adherence to intermittent fasting seems to be a lot easier. And it seems to really boil down to this whole aspect of restricting when you're eating, not so much what or how much you're eating. So I think it's just intuitively a lot easier to say, hey, you can eat whatever you want, just do it in between this time frame. And then outside of that, just don't eat. Or eat very, very, very little. So they've seen a lot of better adherence to intermittent fasting compared to traditional caloric restriction or other types of dietary patterns. So, current research. It has been done with time restricted feeding, and we'll have a review that looks at some of that stuff. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of research out there that looks at actual alternate day fasting. If it looks at any type of alternate day stuff, it's usually energy restricted. I didn't find anything that was just don't eat. They always had some sort of energy intake. The problem with a lot of the intermittent fasting research, and I think it's a product of the fact that it's become popular for weight loss, is that most of the outcomes they look at are for weight. But we'll see that there are some other outcomes that have some really cool implications for what intermittent fasting might be able to do medically. Most of the research, this is a big confounder in the research. There's no set definition on what intermittent fasting is. There's multiple papers that will say, like, we define intermittent fasting if it's this type, we'll define it as this word. This type, we'll define it as this word. And so intermittent fasting as a whole is kind of an umbrella that has a ton of variation under it. And in the studies with both humans and with animal models, they'll have different time windows, different times of the day, like different lengths of time duration, just a lot of variability that makes it really hard to draw any like strong conclusions from the research. And as far as human research goes, there is limited and not very good quality research so far. More research in the animal realm that's showing some cool stuff, but not much translation of that research to humans to say, hey, this actually does do this. Because, with research you start with the cells, you do in vitro stuff, you see like how the cells and like by themselves function. They say, okay, we found this. Let's actually put it in a living creature, like and put it in context and see if it still does the thing. If it still does the thing, say, cool. Let's take this to humans and see if it still does the thing. If it still does the thing, then it's like, cool, that's really good. But most of the time when you go from animal models to human models, you don't always see direct translation because rats aren't humans. But in a lot of ways we do, and so it's important that we have human studies that can verify these findings in the animal models. So the 2014 review just looked at all the animal studies and all the human studies up to 2014 that have been done on time-restricted feeding. So a lot of differences across them. They all had different feeding windows. For the mice, they had 3 to 4 hours, or 8 to 9 hours, or 10 to 12 hours of feeding. The diets, the feeding times, and the disease state differed across all the animal studies. They had some mice groups were on a high-fat diet or a low-fat diet. Some mouse groups were on a normal diet, and not necessarily as controlled with each other, but there were different studies that looked at high-fat versus low-fat, high-fat versus normal diet, low-fat versus normal diet. And so there was just consistency of the diets across all the studies, the feeding times were different. There were some studies that looked at, will the outcomes be different for the mice if we feed them during the day or if we feed them at night? Because as I found out, mice tend to eat at night. They tend to be more nocturnal. And so there were some studies that looked at doing that, like let's give them their food at night when they typically eat and see if the outcomes are different than if we give them their food during the day and make them eat. Disease states, there were 2 studies that compared diabetic mice to non-diabetic mice. So there's just a ton of variability in all the studies. For the human studies, there were differences in weight. Some studies looked at populations that were overweight. Some studies looked at populations that were normal weight. Some looked at populations that were obese. And so different baselines will generally have different outcomes. And then, so the animal studies, what could be drawn from most of those, there was consistent associations with reduced body weight, also reduced total cholesterol, reduced total concentration of triglycerides, decreased glucose, like serum glucose, and decrease in insulin, actually increase in insulin sensitivity as well. IL-6 stands for interleukin 6, and TNF-alpha stands for tumor necrosis factor alpha. These are both well-known inflammatory factors. That higher levels of them mean more inflammation in the body, lower levels are better. Generally, they show decreased levels of both of these, and also increase sensitivity, as I mentioned. From the human studies, it did support the animal studies as far as lower weight, but it mixed. But the trend was towards lower weight. There was like 1 or 2 studies that didn't match, but the majority of them did. Also showed lower triglycerides, also showed lower glucose, showed lower LDL cholesterol, and increasing HDL cholesterol. So a lot of really cool stuff. In the 2017 review, this one was among obese, overweight, and normal weight subjects. It was comparing intermittent fasting to caloric restriction. So that was basically what they set up. They're like, which one's going to be better for weight loss, intermittent fasting or caloric restriction, like chronically, the typical dieting that we do. They found that there was no difference across the weight groups, and that both were equally effective at reducing weight. But what the review did do is it identified a lot of interesting gaps as far as the literature for humans go, and it's more of the metabolic stuff. Visceral fat. You have subcutaneous fat, which is the fat stored under your skin, and that's typical like fine fat. Visceral fat is the kind of fat you don't want. That's where it gets stored like around your internal organs, and that's very bad. So we want less visceral fat. Fat cell size, just how big or how small they are, and how much they change. Maintenance of lean mass, just maintenance of muscle tissue, because generally with caloric restriction, lean mass is one of the first things to go. It happens for the first phase of caloric restriction, where your body tends to use amino acids from the muscle to produce glucose pathway. That eventually, over time, that stops. But the concern of caloric restriction is always to spare muscle mass, and generally consuming higher protein is a way to do that. So we just have a lot of gaps in the human studies about all these metabolic parameters and how they're affected by intermittent fasting. What's cool about it is that we have these questions now. We're seeing that, hey, intermittent fasting might actually be really beneficial for metabolic syndrome, might help reduce cholesterol, might help reduce triglycerides, might do a lot of cool stuff. There's a 2018 review also for overweight and obese populations. The purpose of it was to compare intermittent fasting to usual care being reduce your calorie intake, do caloric restriction, or no care at all. But again, this suffered from a lot of variability. All the regimens are different. Some of them use alternate day fasting. Some of them use like, let's fast for 2 consecutive days. Some of them were told to fast up to 4 days per week. And so it's really hard to get conclusions out of things like this. The duration also different across the studies. Some of the human studies will just, like these range from 12 months. In the previous 2014 review, all of those human studies were like 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And so like you can see short-term effects, but we have no idea of knowing what kind of long-term effects exist. And there are also differing controls. They had some controls where they had intermittent fasting group and a caloric restriction group. Then there were some that just had the intermittent fasting group and didn't have any sort of control or comparison. So while we can see things that happen to them, there's no way of being 100% sure that it wasn't some other confounding variable that caused the outcome without control. And this review also found no significant difference in weight loss between intermittent fasting and caloric restriction. So the suggested findings from what does exist currently are kind of cool. Weight loss is a pretty general finding. Yes, people do lose weight when intermittent fasting. Also makes sense. You're expecting overall energy intake, so you're going to lose weight. There's never been anything that has shown different math on that. If you restrict your calories, you'll lose weight. Sometimes it's a matter of, is that weight coming from actual stored fat? Is that weight coming from muscle mass? But generally there is weight loss regardless of weight. The research suggests that those who follow intermittent fasting will have an increase in insulin sensitivity. Those who follow intermittent fasting will have a decrease in triglycerides, a decrease in total cholesterol, and an improvement in their cholesterol ratio, lower LDL, lower bad cholesterol, higher HDL, higher good cholesterol, and then a reduction in some of these inflammatory factors. As far as the inflammatory factors, actually a lot of these things are related to weight loss too, because as you lose weight, those markers tend to improve as well. So,
can you unpack what insulin sensitivity means in this context?
Yes. So insulin resistance when the cells don't react to insulin to bring sugar into the cell to use it as energy. So basically, insulin sensitivity is better reaction of the cells to insulin. So like when insulin comes in and insulin says, hey, take up sugar, the cell's like, okay, I'll do it.
It decreases your diabetic.
Yeah, essentially. Like better insulin sensitivity means you're like less diabetic. So limitations on the literature here. All of the high quality evidence of the randomized controlled trials, which have the gold standard of scientific experimental studies, they're all in mice. They're all in animal models. And as I mentioned earlier, that's not always translatable to humans. We can't take conclusions we find in mice models, even though they might be super cool, and say, hey, this will totally happen for humans. Because we don't know if we don't do it. Because a lot of times those things will not translate. Human studies that we have are currently mostly observational, meaning they're not set up as an experiment, they're just kind of doing something and saying, hey, let's see what happens. So it's not as experimental, and a lot of them lack control groups. So this doesn't allow us to draw any conclusions from those studies. Like we can see the findings and say, cool, this kind of seems to be the trend of where things are going. But we can't make public health recommendations on this kind of stuff and say that people should definitively do this. There's no set definition of intermittent fasting across any of the studies, so that produces a lot of conflicting results and really makes it hard to draw conclusions because, okay, well, what should people do? Should it be 3 to 4 hours? Should it be 10 to 12 hours? Should it be alternate day fasting? Should it be 2 days consecutive fasting? Should it only be people that are normal weight? Should people that are weight and obesity be the only people that are fasting? We have no way of concretely saying any of these things. Most of the studies are really short in duration. We don't know what will happen if someone follows intermittent fasting for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Is there a point where they will eventually experience adverse consequences from following the diet? We don't know. The focus is primarily on weight loss, which again makes sense, but with all these really interesting metabolic findings, if the focus continues to be on weight loss, we're not going to really see a lot of the potential that this dietary pattern might have for being able to treat different kinds of disease states, for example. And data is frequently not collected on physical activity or diet, which was in the human studies, obviously, because mice know what they're doing. So like on humans, we don't know how exercising influences following an intermittent fasting diet. If they're exercising a lot on days when they're not eating a lot, are they going to have adverse reactions to it? We also don't know what their diet is like when they're following it. Do they eat a really healthy diet? Do they eat lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, or do they eat kind of a typical Western diet? How will the difference in the diets affect how they react to intermittent fasting? Will they have better results if they're following a healthier diet? Will they have worse results if they're following a standard like Western diet? lots and lots and lots of questions. So some opportunities that future research can take. The biggest one I think is expanding the focus of intermittent fasting beyond weight to really see if there is efficacy in this dietary pattern to treat things. Based on kind of what I've seen, in my personal opinion, I think intermittent fasting is going to end up going the direction of the keto diet. As far as it probably shouldn't be used by like a normal person to lose weight. Instead, it should probably be used in a medically controlled environment to treat certain disease states. Because there seems to be a lot of promise for its ability to treat metabolic syndrome and maybe treat diabetes as well. But again, these are medical concerns in certain disease states. Whereas if you're a normal healthy person, not so much reason to follow it. We can design studies to compare the variations of intermittent fasting within the same study and kind of really nail down what protocol of intermittent fasting is the most effective or is the easiest to adhere to and also have the results. Right now we have they could have a group that is doing time restricted feeding for 3 to 4 hours and 8 to 9 hours in the same study and see what the difference is. If we can really hone in on a good protocol, that will help us make public health recommendations if we can translate these things to human studies as well. If we design higher quality, randomized controlled studies in humans to confirm, refute, or explore more of what's found in those animal models, that will be really informative as well. And prospective cohort studies, that's just getting a large group of people together, following them for a long period of time, and seeing the long-term outcomes of following this particular diet or whatever treatment. A lot of cool areas that this can go. Kind of research takeaways that I can put it on is that because of large variation, we have to be cautious about liberally interpreting these findings. We can't say that we have a couple of a handful of studies that show that diabetic rats become less diabetic. That's awesome. I think that's really, really cool. And I would love to see that same thing done in human studies, but we can't take that from an animal model and say, hey, intermittent fasting is going to cure you diabetes. Because we don't have the evidence to support that. We have suggested evidence, so we don't have conclusive evidence. And while findings in animal models are promising, definitely more needed, and we do need more of that translation to human studies. But the cool thing about IF is that it doesn't need to be dismissed out of hand. I know it's different fad diets by professionals have just kind of be written off, but there's a lot of cool research showing that this has a lot more veracity to it than kind of meets the eye. But I think there is a lot of education needed because it's not so much seeming to come out as a really great weight loss diet, even though it can be used that way. It's probably not going to end up being the most advised way to do that because there are other ways to successfully do that as well. So some dietary considerations, if you do choose to explore intermittent fasting or decide to follow it for a spell, some things you would want to take note of. If you're following a restrictive fasting pattern where instead of not eating, you eat a little bit, you would want to maintain a good protein intake. I'd say 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. That's how I think about things. Frustrating because it doesn't mean anything to anybody. If you take your body weight in pounds and multiply it by 2.2 kilograms, and then multiply that by 1.2, that's 2 grams per day. Essentially, just eat higher protein because the point with that is to spare your muscle mass. The more protein you take in to a point means that your body will not use as much of the protein from the muscle because you'll have more diet. So you'll lose less muscle mass essentially. So ways to do that is just keeping protein intake up by eating high quality protein with every meal, either fish, eggs, white meat, chicken. Avoid red and processed meat. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, high protein plant foods like soy, edamame, beans. Beans and legumes are all really good high protein options. Continuing to eat a varied diet is always important because the temptation that you only have certain calories to work with can always lead to sacrifice of the dietary quality. The nice thing about intermittent fasting is that you can still eat carbs. So I'm pretty much mean this one for the days that you would be eating. Is that you can kind of eat whatever you want, But keep in mind that a varied diet is going to be healthier than just eating a bunch of ice cream and other stuff like that. If following energy restriction on fasting days, ways to kind of avoid hunger, you can space out your calories, or alternatively, you can consider eating like a single meal, like kind of timing it in the middle of your day. Because I know a lot of people don't eat breakfast, so they'll be able to get up and kind of go about their day and they won't get hungry around 8 or 1. You can plan your single meal for maybe around that time, make it like nice and varied. Might be good like after that. Just you can either space out your calories or just put them all together. But make sure to distribute them wisely. The nice thing about veggies is they're low calorie and high in fiber, so they can help you feel fuller for longer. And allotting more calories to protein and carbs than fat will also help you maintain muscle mass, have more energy, and also have additional fiber to keep you fuller for longer. Dietary tips there. Some concerns with intermittent fasting. Focus is never given to the actual healthfulness or the quality of the diet. It's just eating, not eating. It's never a question of what are you eating when you're eating. It's just eat. And so, just from the dietetic perspective, you know, you can see benefits and stuff from the act of fasting. But the question is always, how many more benefits might you see if your diet is much healthier, much more varied? Because there's so many iterations, it really is concerning that some people could misinterpret and misapply or over-apply the protocol. People might try to fast for much longer than they should and end up restricting their calorie intake as a whole much more than they should. So just having so many variations makes it hard to speak to sometimes because it'll vary by individual to individual based on like what they think might be best or what they might try. So there's some concern with that. And effective fasting for people on medications or treatments is largely unknown. I think people that should avoid it. Any diabetics on medication, I think there have been a couple of studies that have shown that they can end up either very hyperglycemic or hypoglycemic because of reactions to medication. Any of those with a current history of eating disorders, engaging in any type of fasting or any type of like eat, don't eat mentality is really dangerous for those people. Also, those on medications for like heart issues. Pretty much anyone on medication should probably avoid following intermittent fasting. And if you have more success with other dietary patterns, follow a dietary pattern that works for you. Like intermittent fasting can work for some people, might not work for other people. But if there's something else you prefer, a lot of this really like. Kind of the big picture. This is kind of my question with intermittent fasting. What really are we trying to accomplish? Like what's the goal? Weight loss is a big one. Yeah, but
Purging out toxins.
Huh?
Purging out toxins.
yeah, it will give your liver a lot of time to just kind of flush out some stuff, like get rid of dead cells and those things like that for sure.
Avoiding diabetes.
Huh?
Avoiding diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
Want to boost human growth hormone, which you didn't talk about at all here.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully get that questions. So yeah, there's various things that we're trying to accomplish, and actually, as far as pretty much all of those, you can still achieve them in different ways. So then my question is like, intermittent fasting is not necessarily a magic bullet. There's a lot of provocative findings that are really, really cool, but all those findings can be found the same way in a healthy diet. Healthy diet high in whole foods, healthy diet that looks like this does the same thing. Like, and there's been study after study after study showing that a diet that's based on whole foods, like higher in plant foods, and avoids all of these things, turns out lower triglycerides, lower cholesterol, better cholesterol ratios, lower weight, all that stuff. So you can follow intermittent fasting. You can also follow a healthier diet. There's options. I would say, reading on intermittent fasting, it is a good dietary pattern. If you can follow it, it is effective. It doesn't have to be followed, but it seems to have the most of its research tends to point towards usefulness in treating certain disease states, and that's kind of super exciting in my personal opinion. Having lifestyle interventions to treat things like obesity, diabetes, and all this stuff is much more exciting than saying, hey, budding dietitian, so I always like to see lifestyle integrations happening. Oh yeah, I have this on how to healthy diet work. Following a diet that's high in whole foods are naturally lower calorie than their processed counterparts. And that's mostly a matter of volume and concentration. There's just more to per calorie than for refined stuff. So if you think of actual whole wheat versus flour, you would have to eat a lot more of the whole intact plant to get the same amount of calories that you get from like half a cup flour pulverized version. They're also rich in micronutrients, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Phytochemicals being non-nutritive substances that have been shown to contribute to better health. So they're just cool things that, while they're not essential, and they're not like necessary for life, still do really positive things for us. And antioxidants, all this stuff helps reduce inflammation, helps reduce like weight, modifies a whole lot of other like metabolic pathways, really cool stuff. This is kind of a big picture way of how healthy your diet works. So yes, now questions. You want to start?
Well, I came because I had read a lot of studies that suggest that intermittent fasting boosts human growth hormone. And that's the point.
Okay. I didn't really talk anything like that. I mean, with the increased sensitivity to insulin, it honestly seems that intermittent fasting might more so reduce growth hormones, or like cell-proliferating hormones, like insulin and other stuff. I didn't see anything specifically about human growth hormone.
I'm happy to share those studies with you.
My doctor recommended it. Yeah, so she's seen a lot of, people are scared of it, but she's seen a lot of improvement in patients. I've been doing it, I like it. With keto, fine.
Okay. I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
What's your stance on extended fasting? So those 3 days, 2 to 3 days kind of things. I'm hearing things about it does something specific to your cells at a certain point and extended fasting.
Extended fasting, it's seen a lot more in like religious contexts, and sorts. So interesting thing about like caloric restriction, and its effect like on the cell. But do you guys know what telomeres are? Telomeres. So on the chromosomes on the DNA, there's like caps on the end of the chromosomes that are repeated base sequences. That every time the cell divides, it gets a little bit shorter. And they found that when those caps get completely deleted, the cell dies. Like that's kind of the end of it. So it's kind of thought that telomeres are like a marker for lifespan on cells. And what some research in caloric restriction has found is that cells divide slower, so the telomeres get shorter, slower. And so that's some of the argument behind like the whole anti-aging aspect of it. As far as like adverse outcomes of like extended fasting, I can't give a definitive answer on that. There's going to be some of the stuff we found, but I didn't see any of the research on what happens with extended fasting because I was looking at this. So, sorry, can you answer for that?
You talked a little bit about the glucose storage at the beginning of the fast. So if you're doing a 15-hour fast, what is the glucose storage like toward the end?
So, can you repeat your question?
So earlier on, you talked about how the glucose storage is when you were talking about the glucogenesis, and at the beginning of the fast is when you're burning a lot of the sugars.
Mm-hmm.
What you said. So does that mean after like a 12-hour period, you've pretty much burned all of the sugars, and so now your body is? I mean, obviously, the longer your body's going to start burning things. Do you have kind of what it's doing at each stage? Like it's going to do the sugar first, and then it's going to go to this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So a lot of things happen in tandem. When you start eating and when you have food coming in, that glucose will either be used like for energy needs at the moment, and then any extra will be converted and stored as fat, or it can be converted and stored as fat, or stored as glycogen, which is just the way we store sugar in our bodies. And so when you stop eating, and for those first few hours, you'll start burning through the glycogen because it's just more easily accessible, quick-acting glucose that's available. So it's kind of once you burn through all of that, which takes a few hours, then the gluconeogenic process starts, like kind of upregulates, where you use other like other substances to create more glucose. So when you're starting the fast, it takes a few hours to burn through all the glycogen before you start really going more into ketosis. Like that's kind of the biggest thing is once the glycogen gets burned through, then ketosis picks up where that left off. And we have gluconeogenesis to create enough glucose to maintain normal levels. Because if we go below like certain glucose levels, we just physiologically can't.
Right.
So that's why that process exists. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Do you follow a pattern for IF?
No, personally I don't.
What do you consider low quality research versus high quality?
So it mostly has to do with how well structured and how well controlled everything is. So there's kind of a hierarchy of research, and in human studies, you can have case studies, which is following one person and seeing what happens with them, whatever you do with them, expert opinions, things of that nature. And then you have cohort studies where you have a group of people, watch them. You can either take a group of people, look back in time if they have a certain disease state and want to say, what about their life might have contributed to this? You can look back at the data and find trends, or you can have prospective cohort studies where you follow them. But the higher quality research in humans are randomized controlled trials where you have distinct experimental groups, control group, and really well-defined protocols and patterns for what you're doing with them, and making sure that you're getting all of your confounding variables accounted for. That would include for this, like dietary recalls or some sort of understanding of what are they eating. That would be a huge one. Physical activity, like how much do they eat, how does that affect intermittent fasting. So it's being able to control for as many things as you can, so you can really see are the outcomes that we're seeing because of this thing that we're doing and not something else. So a randomized control trial is the experimental way of establishing that by having two distinct groups that you compare to each other and controlling for all those other confounding variables. And right now we just don't have those things. It's mostly observational. There have been some studies where they have like just the group and they'll do intermittent fasting on them and see what happens. But we have a control group. We can't say it's not because of something else. Any questions? Is that around? I'm sorry. Like, did you have any questions? Okay. Cool. Thank you all.
Thanks.